The Galactic Council convened in their high chamber, a structure older than most civilizations, suspended in orbit above a neutral moon. Delegates from over 30 starfaring species observed the holographic dossier marked Humanity. The data flickered, records of rapid advancement, cultural diplomacy, and a strange, paradoxical reluctance toward military confrontation. They had achieved faster-than-light travel in just 2 centuries, mastered AI integration without rebellion, and unlocked quantum communication channels before most species had even formed planetary alliances. And yet, when offered defensive fleets or sovereign weapon protocols, humans always hesitated. They preferred trade agreements, mutual research pacts, and conflict de-escalation. To the Council, it looked like fear masquerading as diplomacy. The Creo representative hissed a laugh, its mandibles clacking. They refused to even deploy retaliatory forces when raided. Cowardice is deeply embedded. Others nodded in agreement. A consensus was forming, not on paper, not declared, but growing in weight. Humanity, while intellectually sharp, was a passive species. Useful for knowledge, harmless in power. When Earth requested peacekeeper status during a conflict in the Pelos Rift, the request was unanimously denied. Their inability to enforce authority, the Council decided, disqualified them. But their cultural charm persisted. Humans opened embassies in unlikely places. They sent literature, music, food, and philosophy across the stars. They invited even their political rivals to the Terran Cultural Expo. Species that once believed war was sacred found themselves attending human symphonies, arguing over the meaning of a Terran poem instead of border disputes. It was unnerving. The Graal speaker once asked, "Is this their weapon? Confusion through kindness?" The chamber laughed. No one took it seriously. Some analysts raised concerns, though they were mostly ignored. A small file circulated in intelligence circles, humanity's pre-interstellar history. Thousands of wars. Global conflicts with kill counts in the millions. But that history stopped abruptly about 300 years ago. Since then, Earth had demilitarized rapidly, shifting its funding to science, education, and off-world terraforming. The assumption was they had evolved past violence. The reality was less considered. They had simply grown tired of it. The Zoranth diplomat proposed a motion: limit Earth's seat on technological councils. Humans protested but did not resist. They argued calmly, citing logic and unity. No fleets, no threats. Just words. The Council took it as a sign of docility. They are creatures of comfort, one delegate stated. Give them entertainment, and they'll never challenge power. When human colonies asked for joint patrols on pirate-heavy trade routes, only silence answered. No ships were sent. Humanity instead rerouted its supply chains, sacrificing efficiency for peace. Their actions always leaned toward avoidance. Even when smaller species, emboldened by Council indifference, started probing human colonies with surveillance drones, there was no retaliation. A formal protest would arrive, clinical and non-threatening. The aliens began to believe humans didn't understand how power functioned in the galaxy. They mistook diplomacy for weakness. And yet, something lingered beneath. A few delegates felt it during Earth's address at the last Grand Council summit. The human ambassador, calm, composed, his voice steady, said, "We build peace not because we are afraid of war, but because we know it too well." The words were recorded but dismissed as poetic nonsense. No strategic weight was assigned. The ambassador's eyes, however, told a different story. Some who watched it back, frame by frame, felt something ancient in that stare. But such feelings were irrational. The Council trusted data, patterns, probability. Strategic briefings began omitting Earth as a potential military power. Instead, they were listed as non-hostile scientific contributors. Their requests for greater defensive autonomy were tabled indefinitely. A few Council members even lobbied to convert several human-adjacent sectors into shared mining operations. Earth's protest came, of course, logical, firm, yet respectful. Not a single missile was moved. The Council concluded its assessments. Humanity was peaceful by nature. Harmless. incapable of projecting real force. Valuable in some ways, yes, but lacking what mattered most: willingness to dominate when tested. A consensus emerged: humans were afraid of war. And so, the Council turned its gaze elsewhere, believing Earth had shown them everything it could. They were wrong. The first move came subtly: a trade embargo disguised as economic restructuring. Earth's top-tier quantum drives, once in demand across dozens of systems, were suddenly flagged for security risk assessment. Council member states stopped importing Terran tech. The justification: excessive reliance on human systems could create dependency. In truth, it was a calculated test. Would humanity retaliate economically? Would they challenge the decision? Earth responded with rerouted exports, shifting focus to lesser economies without protest. No sanctions, no retaliatory tariffs. The Council interpreted it as confirmation: humans lacked the backbone for real resistance. Soon after, minor member species, emboldened by the Council's silence, began probing the edges of human influence. A small outpost in the Galath corridor reported harassment from Zarnan scout ships. Civilian supply ships were stopped, inspected without warrants, and occasionally fired upon with low-yield plasma bursts, just enough to intimidate, not enough to draw galactic condemnation. Earth filed formal protests through diplomatic channels. The response was delays, dismissals, and eventually silence. No security forces were dispatched. No arbitration tribunals were held. Behind closed doors, the narrative solidified: humans wouldn't fight back. Humanity kept trying. They sent envoys to the Vrake Dominion and the Concordat, asking for joint naval patrols. Each offer was ignored. A proposal for a defensive pact was dismissed without reading. Even long-standing partners began to distance themselves. Earth's pleas sounded desperate to the Council: more evidence of a species begging for peace because it feared its own extinction. The diplomatic chatter among Council elites turned mocking. "Earth will never bite," one delegate said. "You can kick the dog and it'll still wag its tail." Then came the incident at Ilara 6. A mid-tier human colony, known for its medical research, was raided by mercenaries believed to be funded by the Cinder Block, a Council member with plausible deniability. Civilian deaths were reported. Infrastructure was destroyed. The Cinder denied involvement, of course. The Council refused to investigate. Earth once again responded with restraint. The ambassador stood in the chamber, voice unwavering, and said, "You assume our silence is weakness. You mistake discipline for fear. This will be the last time." His warning went unheeded. That night, Council analysts reviewed the footage. No hidden weapons. No mobilization. No sudden surge of activity from Earth's fleets. In fact, the opposite. Human comms went dark. Their orbital traffic slowed. Civilian trade halted. Data networks stopped broadcasting updates. The interstellar market blamed it on technical faults. Analysts labeled it strategic hibernation. None thought it was a prelude. Meanwhile, whispers spread. A small information leak from the Quinari Union hinted that human AI networks had entered closed-loop isolation protocols. Terran cyber systems were no longer traceable. No public data. No digital emissions. Council technicians attempted remote pings, each returned null. Human algorithms, once transparent and collaborative, had become invisible. Some interpreted this as retreat. Others began to worry. A meeting of Council military strategists was held in secrecy. One veteran of the Korath Wars reviewed archived Terran military records. There was mention of pre-space human tactics, total warfare, asymmetrical methods, cyber-psychological operations. No interstellar species had ever fully developed such concepts. They were too chaotic, too costly. The strategists concluded the same as the Council: those methods were extinct. There was nothing to worry about. Then Earth shut down its embassies. Every single one, simultaneously. The departure was quiet, systematic, precise. No declarations, no warnings. Just absence. That move sent a ripple through even the most arrogant of Council members. Diplomatic signals sent to Terran Command returned automated replies. Operations concluded. Contact suspended indefinitely. A few outreach attempts were met with silence. One vessel dispatched toward Earth's orbit disappeared from tracking arrays before crossing the sole border. No wreckage. No evidence. Yet no one panicked. The Council was confident. They still believed humans were posturing. A desperate play by a pacifist species losing its standing. "Let them sulk," the Council chair said. They'd finally accepted their place. But something deeper stirred across the Council's lesser worlds. Strange outages. Minor system anomalies. Glitches in deep space logistics. Subtle, persistent failures without cause. Most blamed aging infrastructure. None suspected the pattern forming behind it. The Council still saw no fleets, no invasions, no explosions. They saw silence and believed it was surrender. In truth, it was preparation. The strike on Halion Prime marked the tipping point. A thriving human colony of over 20 million, renowned for its medical exports and neutral diplomatic status, was annihilated in a coordinated assault. Orbital defense systems were overwhelmed within minutes. Civilian transports attempting evacuation were vaporized mid-flight. No warning. No claim of responsibility. The Council called it a rogue incident, tragic but outside their jurisdiction. Earth asked for a tribunal. None was granted. The Council refused to acknowledge the attack as a deliberate act. They assumed the humans would grieve quietly and move on, as they always had. But Earth didn't respond at all. There were no statements, no memorials, no outrage. No morning broadcasts, no civilian protests. Just complete global silence. Human media stopped reporting. Interstellar transmissions ceased. Planetary systems once bustling with interspecies trade froze. Council intelligence attempted surveillance sweeps across Terran sectors. The results were unsettling: no fleet signatures, no military builds, no sign of mobilization. Just a quiet, surgical evacuation of outposts and colonies. Terraforming projects were abandoned. Civilian staff vanished. Merchant ships returned to Sol, locked behind encryption. Even internal human chatter stopped transmitting across known channels. This withdrawal wasn't disorderly, it was controlled. The Council interpreted it as isolationism, perhaps even surrender. "They've lost the will to engage," one military attaché said. "Their deterrent was diplomacy. With that failing, they have nothing left." The diplomatic corps echoed that sentiment. Without war fleets, without force projection, Earth's role in galactic politics had ended. But beneath that false narrative, the real shift was happening in places no one could see. Blackout protocols activated across human AI cores. Interstellar relays that once managed trade traffic went dark and repurposed themselves. Massive data pulses were intercepted heading toward dead zones, areas humans had previously flagged as uninhabitable or economically unviable. The Council dismissed them as abandoned research sites. They weren't. They were staging grounds. One of the Council's few independent analysts reviewed the timing. The Halion attack had occurred precisely 3 seconds after a planetary defense test concluded. That wasn't coincidence. It was orchestration. Someone had waited for Earth's vulnerability. That meant prior knowledge. That meant planning. That meant the Council had been infiltrated long ago. Whispers began circulating that the Terran absence wasn't retreat, it was movement. Subspace anomalies were detected near uncharted systems. Brief, nearly undetectable spatial distortions. Initial reports were buried. But some captains began refusing patrols near Sol-adjacent sectors. Their crews reported sightings of ghost fleets, ships with no emission signatures, hulls that didn't reflect scans, engines that left no trail. Those who chased them found nothing. Those who ignored them disappeared. Then the incidents escalated. A Council munitions depot in the Creel sector detonated without breach alarms. Surveillance showed no attackers, only a sudden power loss followed by a silent overload. A logistics platform orbiting Zora 9 vanished from orbital tracking in the middle of a scheduled transmission. Entire data archives on human military history were erased from the Council's central servers. At the exact moment Terran comms went offline. The Council summoned a classified briefing. For the first time in centuries, there was no agreement. Some demanded retaliation against Earth, convinced they were behind the sabotage. Others called for renewed diplomacy. But Earth wasn't listening. No embassies remained. No messages got through. No probes returned. A lone ambassador from the Myrene Accord delivered a chilling statement. His delegation had received an untraceable packet containing a single line of Terran code. The translation was simple. "You knew what we were. And still you tried." At that point, panic began to bleed into high command. Fleet movements were accelerated. Defense platforms were reactivated. Treaties once considered irrelevant were suddenly reviewed. For the first time, the Council recognized the possibility that humanity hadn't disappeared. It had simply chosen not to be seen. They hadn't retaliated. They hadn't demanded reparations. They had just removed themselves, and taken with them something the Council couldn't measure: intent. That absence, that quiet, that precision, it wasn't surrender. It was the storm before the burn. Without notice, entire sectors began to shut down. Supply chains fractured overnight. Orbital traffic relays blinked out, not from attack, but absence: empty nodes, abandoned protocols, silent transmissions. Council systems reliant on Terran infrastructure began failing one by one. Medical satellites malfunctioned. Banking ledgers lost entire weeks of data. AI cores designed to self-correct ran diagnostic loops into failure. No malware. No code trace. Just precision absence. Someone had pulled threads they shouldn't have seen. The first confirmed strike came not with weapons, but with silence. The Zarkal communications grid, the largest subspace router in 3 sectors, collapsed in seconds. No explosion. Just black. When Council technicians accessed the core, they found every operating system reset, wiped, not by force, but by keyless termination, a method thought impossible. Logs were overwritten with nothing. No fingerprint. Only a final message, displayed once, untranslated. "Stand down." Within hours, command relays collapsed in 6 more zones. Defense satellites turned off, not destroyed. Patrol ships drifted powerless in space, emergency beacons unresponsive. Pilots were alive, trapped, isolated, untouched. They were not killed. They were rendered irrelevant. The Council scrambled. Emergency meetings triggered planetary lockdowns. Fleets deployed toward high-risk trade routes. But no enemy was found. No warships. No invasions. Just pockets of nothing where once existed control. Entire sectors went dark, not from destruction, but from design. Humanity had never built fleets for open war. They'd built precision networks for control, and now they were retracting access. What was left behind crumbled. Soon, the first confirmed visual hit reached the Council. A Cinder dreadnought, stationed in a classified security zone, suffered a full systems breach in under 6 seconds. The ship's internal sensors captured it, shadows appearing on the outer hull, not by impact, but by absorption. No beam. No projectile. Hull integrity failed without cause. No explosion followed. The crew survived, each one rendered unconscious simultaneously by localized neural interference. Again, nothing destroyed. Everything disabled. Left intact. A message appeared in the ship's command module. "This is mercy." The Council's highest strategists recognized the pattern too late. Humanity wasn't attacking in a conventional sense. They were demonstrating control. No targets lost life unless necessary. No civilian infrastructure was touched. Only military capability, stripped layer by layer with no warning, no declaration. An entire Council logistics fleet vanished in transit, 68 vessels, gone. Navigation systems last showed transit paths rerouted milliseconds before jump. Probes sent after them never returned. Council records once declared humans incapable of fleet dominance. That assumption disintegrated when the central observation hub above Gliese 7 caught brief visual confirmation of Earth's newest vessel. It wasn't large. It wasn't armed. It moved through gravity as if it ignored inertia. No engines. No propulsion signature. It drifted through battle-hardened patrol zones without triggering a single defense protocol. One image captured it, then the entire station lost power. All backup systems melted. Staff survived. The data did not. Every major Council military AI began shutting down over the next 40 hours. Autonomous cores simply went dormant, systems intact but unreachable. Their failsafes, coded with Terran contributions decades earlier, now ran rewritten protocols. Each of them responded to Council overrides with the same phrase. Permission revoked. Now panic hit the core worlds. Broadcasts stopped. Trade halted. Entire economies collapsed. Every attempt to escalate failed. Any fleet mobilized met with system-wide paralysis within seconds of jump. Engineers began discovering small modules buried deep inside long-forgotten infrastructure, silent Terran tech, embedded decades ago under the guise of optimization. Humanity had spent years preparing, not for war, but for inevitability. They didn't strike to destroy. They struck to render power meaningless. The Council finally received a direct message. It wasn't transmitted across usual diplomatic lines. It was embedded in the pulse of every disabled AI, whispered into every decrypted log, encoded in failing subspace relays. A single statement, synchronized across the galaxy. You believed we feared war. What we feared was what we'd do if you made us remember it. The chamber once called the Galactic Council stood hollow. Delegates who had once spoken with certainty now sent proxies or stayed hidden. Panic moved faster than orders. No wars had been declared, yet no one trusted the silence. The old order had collapsed not through conquest, but irrelevance. Species that once mocked humanity now scrambled to open dialogue, but Earth remained unreachable. No ambassador returned. No offer was acknowledged. Each attempt at communication met with automated reroutes, encrypted echoes, or pure emptiness. The galaxy had spoken for centuries. Now humanity had nothing more to say. Entire fleets were docked indefinitely. Security protocols stayed active only in appearance. Power still flowed, but no system responded the same. Attempts to reboot Council defense hubs failed at root code levels. Engineers discovered entire systems recompiled around new protocols, Terran written, impossible to reverse. The networks obeyed only when the input patterns mimicked Earth's own command language. There was no battle for control. It had already shifted. Quietly, surgically, without permission. Smaller worlds began seeking protection, not from Earth, but under it. Systems formerly neutral now broadcast oaths of alliance. One by one, sectors declared compliance with Terran protocols. Not out of submission, but out of necessity. Human infrastructure still worked. Trade lines restored if left untouched. Systems unaltered by Council directives began functioning again. There were no demands, no ultimatums. Just silent criteria: behave peacefully, or remain cut off. In the chaos, one message finally pierced the blackout. Not official. Not military. A civilian transmission, broadcast from Earth, visible in a dozen languages, short and clear. There will be no war. Only memory. The impact shattered what little resistance remained. Those still planning retaliation abandoned the idea. Every scenario ended in loss, political, technological, existential. No one knew the extent of human capability anymore. That uncertainty reshaped the power balance more than any battle ever could. For the first time in recorded history, galactic governance rewrote itself without war. A new structure formed, decentralized but unmistakably aligned. Earth did not demand leadership. It didn't need to. Systems that followed the Terran example were restored, data flows returned, logistics revived, defense networks stabilized. They didn't call it surrender. They called it recalibration. Publicly, it was labeled the New Accord. Privately, everyone knew what it truly was, the day fear changed direction. A single protocol now echoed through previously sovereign systems. No military expansion without Terran review transparency. No external interference with human domains. No council power could act without the consideration of Earth's response. And that response would remain undefined. That ambiguity carried more weight than any rule. It forced respect. Not from loyalty, but from understanding. Leaders across empires began revisiting Terran history. Not the interstellar record, but ancient human archives. They studied civilizations that collapsed under their own ambition. They read accounts of Earth's past wars, measured in millions lost, cities vaporized, nations forgotten. The clarity dawned too late. Humanity didn't fear destruction. They feared becoming what they once had been. The silence hadn't been weakness. It was restraint. Chosen, not forced. Now, that restraint was the foundation of peace. Children across dozens of species were taught a new lesson. Humanity's strength wasn't in what they built, but what they refused to destroy. Their ships didn't patrol. Their weapons didn't show. Their fleets didn't boast. But their presence was everywhere, felt in every revived system, seen in every stabilized economy, heard in the hum of restored subspace. Peace reigned, but not through treaties. Through the shared recognition that some forces do not fight unless pushed, and when they do not come to conquer. They come to end the game. The Council, if it could still be called that, resumed under a different model. No throne. No central voice. Just a rotating quorum, operating under protocols seeded by Terran AI. It wasn't announced. It wasn't celebrated. But everyone followed it. In the end, no banners waved. No fleets paraded. No planets burned. Humanity had not claimed the galaxy. It had reminded it.